Elderly homeless man helps Elon Musk with his broken car, but the next day receives a news so surprising that it changes his life and leaves the world speechless. Life can change in an instant, but what happens when that change is unexpected, almost magical? George Miller, a 68-year-old man, carries the weight of an existence marked by tragedies. A former mechanical engineer, he saw his world collapse after the death of his wife, a devastating financial collapse, and a constant struggle with alcoholism. Today, he lives on the streets of Los Angeles, amidst a sea of skyscrapers that reflect the glory of a city that seems to have forgotten his presence. His vulnerability is palpable, but behind the tired gaze, a sharp intelligence and a memory full of accomplishments still shine. George's dreams, now overshadowed by cruel reality, echo in his mind like a distant whisper. On an ordinary day, while George tries to fix an old shopping cart under the shadow of a bridge, a luxury car pulls up beside him. It's a Tesla Model S, and at the wheel is Elon Musk, the visionary billionaire known for his innovations. The hood is raised, and Musk seems frustrated on the phone, unable to resolve the mechanical issue. George, feeling a spark of hope, approaches and offers his help. Using his improvised tools and mechanical knowledge, he quickly diagnoses and fixes the problem, surprising Musk and unknowingly changing the course of his own life. The next day, George wakes up to find his image splashed across all the newspapers. Elon Musk, in an unexpected gesture of gratitude, shared a video where he calls him the best mechanic I've ever met. The sudden fame attracts curious onlookers, reporters, and even old acquaintances, bringing to light a past that George thought he had left behind. Life on the streets, however, is not easy, and as he navigates this new reality, he faces emotional challenges that threaten his recovery. George, now under the spotlight of sudden fame, finds himself in a whirlwind of emotions. The media attention and the curiosity of the people around him make him feel a mix of relief and anxiety. He experiences a glimmer of hope, but also a deep distrust towards this new reality. The old ghosts of his life on the streets still haunt him, and he fears that this opportunity could vanish as quickly as it appeared. Meanwhile, new characters begin to enter George's life. Among them is Lucy, a young journalist who is fascinated by his story. She is ambitious and wants to write a book about his life, but she also carries her own battles. Lucy struggles with the pressure of her job and a tumultuous relationship that makes her question her choices. The friendship that forms between them is initially based on mutual admiration, but soon turns into an emotional battleground. Lucy sees in George a symbol of resilience, while he sees her as a reminder of everything he has lost: stability, love, and a dignified life. George also faces resistance from Tom, a former co-worker who approaches him with disdain and skepticism. Tom, who has always held a rigid and conservative stance, believes George does not deserve the attention he is receiving. He confronts him in one of his interviews, insinuating that George is merely taking advantage of the situation. This interaction triggers a wave of insecurity in George, who is already struggling with the pressure of being seen as a hero. He wonders if he truly has value or if everything is just a facade that will collapse. As George's fame grows, he begins to lose control over his life. The pressure to stay sober and the expectation to be someone he is not cause cracks in his determination. One afternoon, while walking down a busy street, he comes across an old bar he has frequented for years. The smell of alcohol and the music echoing from inside draw him in, and for a moment he is consumed by temptation. This internal struggle reflects his weaknesses, revealing that the battle against addiction is a constant, and that fame is not an antidote for pain. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. And let us know in the comments which city you are watching this video from. Lucy tries to help George navigate this new world, but her influence also generates conflict. She encourages him to stay away from environments that could trigger his old habits, but George feels suffocated and misunderstood. He begins to question whether Lucy truly cares about him or just about the story she can tell. George's vulnerability becomes even more evident as he struggles to find his place in a world that seems to have no space for him. The emotional impact of this new life begins to wear George down. He finds himself at the mercy of others' expectations, and the pressure to remain perfect leads him to a constant state of anguish. One night, after an event where he was applauded and admired, he returns to his makeshift shelter under the bridge and breaks down in tears. The weight of his new fame and the memory of his previous life collide, and he finds himself in an abyss of loneliness and despair. He wonders if he will ever truly escape the shadows of his past, or if fame only serves to highlight his scars. This crisis moment forces him to reflect on his beliefs and dreams. He realizes that fame is not enough to heal the deep wounds he carries. George struggles to find a greater meaning in his life, a reason to keep fighting. He begins to wonder if he could use his story to help others who live in similar situations, transforming his pain into hope. This idea of solidarity begins to blossom in his heart, but the path to self-discovery is still fraught with challenges and doubts. As the days go by, George's internal struggle intensifies, and he finds himself in a dilemma: to follow the path of fame, which could lead him back to the abyss, or to seek a new life that, although filled with uncertainties, could give him renewed purpose. George's journey is now not just about reclaiming his life, but also about finding a new meaning for his existence in a world that seems to have forgotten his struggle. George finds himself surrounded by a new set of challenges that make his journey even more complex. The fame that once seemed like a gift began to reveal its sharp claws. He started receiving job offers and invitations to events, but the pressure to behave like a public figure was overwhelming. The curious stares and expectations from everyone around him made him feel more and more like an object on display, rather than a human being with emotions and vulnerabilities. The sense of control he had slowly gained in his life was slipping through his fingers, and he found himself struggling not to sink into self-pity. The emotional impact of these new challenges was palpable. George began to feel the physical effects of stress, insomnia, loss of appetite, and a constant sense of anxiety that followed him like a shadow. He spent sleepless nights reminiscing about his life on the streets, the choices that led him there, and the people still trapped in that cycle of misery. These thoughts became a vicious cycle, feeding his insecurity and leading him to question whether he truly had the strength to resist the temptations surrounding him. Lucy, for her part, was increasingly immersed in her own struggle. The pressure from her job intensified, and the expectations surrounding the book she was writing left her in a constant state of nervousness. She became an increasingly anxious presence in George's life, trying to help him, while often revealing her own fragility. The friendship that once felt like a safe harbor began to crumble under the weight of unspoken expectations. Conversations that were once filled with hope and laughter became laden with tension. George began to feel that Lucy not only wanted to tell his story, but was also putting her own needs and ambitions ahead of what he truly needed. Tom, on the other hand, continued to be a source of conflict in George's life. With his skeptical gaze and corrosive comments, he acted as a constant reminder of the doubts George hid from everyone. During a live recording, Tom made a scornful remark that caused George to hesitate in his responses. The cameras captured his moment of weakness, and the fallout was immediate. The scene became a trending topic on social media, and George found himself at the center of a storm of criticism and speculation, amplifying his insecurities. He began to wonder if he was worthy of all the attention he was receiving, or if he was, in fact, a fraud who would ultimately be exposed. The external pressure, combined with his own internal battle, made George feel increasingly isolated. He began to distance himself from Lucy, fearing that their friendship was becoming an emotional trap. Conversations became rare, and meetings grew more and more tense. Lucy, noticing the change, tried to reach out, but George withdrew, feeling suffocated by the need to be okay and the pressure to be the person everyone expected him to be. The friendship that once brought him comfort now felt like a burden. Meanwhile, a new challenge emerged unexpectedly. A former colleague of George's, who had become an influential social activist, appeared on the scene. He believed in George's ability to help others facing similar difficulties. The idea of using his experience to help others seemed appealing, but also frightening. George found himself torn between the chance to become an agent of change and the fear that his personal struggle was far from resolved. The proposal was tempting, but he wondered if he was ready to expose himself again and if he truly had anything to offer. These challenges culminated in a moment of deep reflection for George. He realized that he could not continue living under the pressure of being someone he was not. The question that pounded in his mind was, what truly mattered? Fame, validation, or the ability to help others and find a greater purpose? The weight of external expectations and the pain of his own vulnerability were intertwining, setting the stage for a significant decision that would affect his future and his understanding of himself. The search for authenticity, now clearer than ever, became the guiding thread of his journey as he prepared to confront the shadows of his life and perhaps discover the light he had long sought. George was at a breaking point when an unexpected event shook his foundations and forced him to reevaluate his life. During a charity event where he was supposed to be the center of attention, he encountered an old childhood friend, Lucas, who had been one of the few people to stand by him during his toughest days. Lucas, now an active advocate for social causes, was there to raise funds. But what caught George's attention the most was the way he dedicated himself to those people who, like him once, faced the harshness of life on the streets. As they spoke, Lucas shared a powerful story about a young man who had lost all hope and was about to give up. He talked about how a simple act of kindness had changed the course of that boy's life. George felt a wave of emotions wash over him as he listened to those words. The pain, hope, and possibility of transformation that permeated Lucas's narrative touched George's heart deeply. He found himself reflecting on his own path, his struggles, and the weight of the expectations surrounding him. Lucas's vision, so firm and full of purpose, made George question whether he was truly using his own experience to help others, or if he was merely consuming himself with his own insecurities. That night, as he tried to sleep, George tossed and turned with thoughts in his mind. He felt torn between the fame that surrounded him and the idea of becoming an agent of change. The external pressure forced him to be someone he was not, but the connection with Lucas reignited a flame within him. A part of George longed to make a difference, to become a voice for those who did not have one. However, the fear of exposing his vulnerability and failing to meet expectations paralyzed him. He found himself in an internal battle, weighing the idea of giving up the security that fame provided in exchange for a greater purpose. The emotional impact of that conversation made him question everything. George began to feel a mix of relief and fear. The relief of realizing that there might be a path that did not involve just the superficial shine of fame, but also offered a sense of fulfillment and connection with others. The fear, on the other hand, haunted him. What if he failed? What if his vulnerability became a public weakness? Doubts consumed him, but something inside him began to stir. As days passed, this new perspective started to shape his thoughts and actions. George found himself more determined to seek ways to help others, to transform his pain into hope. He began to plan a social project, a space where he could share his story and offer support to young people facing similar difficulties. The idea of using his experience to positively impact someone's life became a new focal point in his life, creating new circumstances that had previously seemed impossible. This turning point not only offered George a new direction, but also began to create a space for healing in his friendship with Lucy. He realized he had distanced himself from her, not because he did not value her, but because he was so immersed in his own struggle that he could not see the support she offered. As he began to open up about his new intentions, a new dynamic formed between them, a space of understanding and collaboration. As George prepared to take this step, the anticipation of a new climax in his life became palpable. He was about to face not only the challenges of being a public figure, but also the confrontation with his own shadows and fears. The road ahead was filled with uncertainties, but now he carried with him a renewed light, the desire to be authentic, to truly make a difference, and perhaps find a new purpose that would free him from the chains of pressure and fame. George's journey was about to transform, and he was finally ready to embrace it. George was about to face the greatest challenge of his life. The idea of creating a social project began to take shape, but the pressure of fame and public expectations still haunted him like shadows on a dark night. He decided that the opening of his support space for at-risk youth would be the moment to expose himself, to show his vulnerability. But this brought with it a paralyzing fear. The event was scheduled for the following week, and he knew it would be a test not only of his organizational skills, but also of his courage. The night before the event, George felt inundated with insecurities. The voices in his head echoed, "What if no one shows up? What if people mock you? What if you fail?" He tried to distract himself, but the anxiety was unbearable. At that moment, Lucas, his old friend, reached out to him. George, with a heavy heart, vented his concerns and fears. Lucas, with the calmness that always characterized him, reminded him of the importance of being authentic, of sharing his true story. People connect with vulnerability, George. That's what inspires them. On the morning of the event, the hall was decorated simply but with love. George prepared himself, but tension pulsed in his chest. As he looked at the audience beginning to arrive, his heart raced. He saw familiar faces, but also strangers, people he had never seen before, all there to hear his story and learn about his project. Fear overwhelmed him, but he remembered what Lucas had told him. It was time to face his demons. When he stepped onto the stage, George felt the whole world watching him. An expectant silence filled the room. He took a deep breath and began to speak. At first, his words came out hesitantly, but as he opened up about his struggles, his insecurities, and his hopes, his voice grew stronger. He spoke about the nights he felt lost, the pressure of being someone he was not, and how Lucas had been a beacon in his life. He talked about the young person he had met on the streets, who had almost given up on everything, and how a small act of kindness had changed his fate. The audience was silent, but George could feel the connection forming. He was not there just to receive applause. He was there to share a message of hope and transformation. He felt tears streaming down his face, but he didn't mind. Vulnerability made him stronger. He asked the audience to join him in creating a space where young people could feel like they belonged, a place of welcome and support. Just as he was about to conclude, a familiar figure appeared in the crowd, Lucy. She looked at him with an expression of support and love, and it filled him with courage. George paused, looked into her eyes, and realized he was surrounded by people who truly cared. Finally, he made a decisive choice. If you have ever felt lonely, lost, or hopeless, I am here for you. Together we can change this reality. The room erupted in applause, and what had once been a sea of unfamiliar faces transformed into a community. George felt a wave of emotion and relief. He had overcome his greatest fear, not only by sharing his truth, but also by inviting others to join him in a greater purpose. The tension that consumed him was replaced by a feeling of belonging and fulfillment. The emotional impact was palpable. Lucas smiled, proud of the friend he had become. Lucy supported him, and other young people in the audience were inspired by his story. George realized that by opening up and risking failure, he had found a new purpose and direction. It was not just about him. It was about everyone he could help. George's journey was just beginning, but he had taken the first step toward a future that promised to be much more meaningful than any fame could offer. He had found his voice, and now he was ready to use it. The room was filled with hope, and he knew that together they could make a difference. George felt that his life had changed forever after that day on stage. The echo of applause still resonated in his mind, but what touched him the most were the looks of hope and gratitude he found in the audience. He knew that his speech had not only freed him from his insecurities, but had also planted seeds of change in the lives of many young people present. As the days went by, George began to receive messages of support and thanks from people inspired by his courage. This motivated him to work even harder on his social project, which was now becoming a tangible reality. Reflecting on his journey, George realized that he had learned valuable lessons. Vulnerability, which he had once seen as weakness, had revealed itself as a powerful form of human connection. He recognized that every sacrifice made along the way, every moment of doubt, had contributed to his growth. The support of Lucas and the presence of Lucy had always been fundamental pillars, and he decided he wanted to give back that friendship and unconditional love. Lucas, who had always believed in George's potential, became one of the main collaborators of the project. Together, they worked to create a safe and welcoming environment for young people where everyone could share their stories without fear of judgment. Lucy, in turn, brought her own experiences and became a mentor for the teenagers, inspiring them with her determination and strength. As the social project came to life, George realized that his fame could be a tool for good. He began to use his platforms to raise funds and raise awareness in the community about the importance of supporting vulnerable youth. What started as a personal challenge became a legacy that would transcend his own story. The launch event was just the beginning. George understood that his mission was to create a space where solidarity and altruism could flourish, impacting not only the lives of young people, but also the community as a whole. He saw that his purpose was now deeper than simply being a public figure. It was about making a difference in people's lives. George looked back and saw not only the man he was before, but the person he had become. He had found not only his voice, but a new reason to live. Looking toward the future, George felt fulfilled, knowing that together they could create a world where no one felt alone or hopeless. This legacy of love and transformation would be the true mark of his journey,